Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that today is the 250th anniversary of America's independence? On July 4th, 1776, the 13 colonies officially declared their independence from Great Britain and began the remarkable journey of becoming the United States of America. Learn how July 4th became America's official Independence Day, and discover that early celebrations included public readings, parades, cannon salutes, bonfires, and even the very first 4th of July fireworks with 13 rockets for the 13 colonies.
If you built a time machine, right, and traveled back to July 4th, 1776, to throw an Independence Day party.
You'd be the only one there.
Exactly. You would be standing completely alone in an empty room, because the actual day of American independence had already happened.
Yeah, it's one of those historical realities that, kind of shatters our modern assumptions.
Right, because we treat history like this clean, linear calendar.
We do, but the truth is usually a lot more complicated than that.
And, we are right on the cusp of the 250th anniversary of America's Independence Day. 2.5 centuries. So, to you, our naturally curious listener, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are entirely skipping the standard textbook version of how the United States was born.
Which I think is a relief for everyone, honestly.
Oh, for sure. Instead, we're going to examine, the chronological confusion of the actual founding, the deeply psychological ways the early colonists dismantled British traditions, and importantly, the divine establishment that orchestrated the entire endeavor.
Which means we really need to start by correcting the calendar. Before we can analyze the traditions of the 4th of July, we have to look at the 2nd of July.
Right, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the actual legal separation from Great Britain, like the decisive vote by the Second Continental Congress, that happened on July 2, 1776.
Exactly. The driving force behind this was a resolution proposed by a Virginia delegate named Richard Henry Lee, and it was seconded by Massachusetts delegate John Adams.
And this wasn't just some philosophical essay, right?
No, not at all. I mean, it was a blunt legal severance.
I actually want to read the exact wording of the Lee resolution here, because it leaves zero room for misinterpretation. It states, quote, "These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown."
And it goes on to say that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved.
I mean, that is the language of no return.
Oh, absolutely. If you vote yes on that resolution, you are committing treason against the British Crown. The stakes were absolute.
Life or death, basically.
Yeah, and the political maneuvering required to get the colonies to agree was incredibly delicate. When the vote finally happened, 12 of the 13 colonies voted in favor. New York was the sole abstention.
Wait, why did New York abstain? Were they holding out loyalty to the king, or is there something else going on?
It was actually entirely bureaucratic, which is, I think, a very human detail. The New York delegates personally supported the resolution.
Okay, so they were on board.
Yeah, but they hadn't received official authorization from their provincial Congress back home to actually vote for independence.
Ah, so they were essentially just waiting for the mail to arrive with their permission slip.
Basically, yes. They eventually got that authorization a week later, making the decision unanimous. But on July 2nd, their hands were tied.
Wow, that makes sense. But even with New York waiting on the sidelines, John Adams recognized the gravity of that vote immediately, right?
He did. He wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail, just bursting with confidence.
Right. He told her, quote, "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America." He literally envisioned future generations celebrating the 2nd of July with parades, games, and bonfires.
And he had every reason to believe that. The vote on the Lee resolution was the definitive action. From a parliamentary perspective, July 2nd is Independence Day.
Okay, but I have to push back here. If July 2nd was the legal reality, and heavyweights like John Adams were already declaring it the most important day in American history, why did it get completely eclipsed?
It's a great question.
Because think about it like this. It's like celebrating your birthday on the day your birth certificate was filed at the courthouse rather than the day you were actually born.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
Right. So why do we let the approval of the final paperwork 2 days later dictate the calendar.
Well, what's fascinating here is the logistics of information distribution. You have to remember the environment of 1776.
Slow internet, obviously.
Exactly. The public couldn't watch the Continental Congress deliberate. They had no idea what was happening behind those closed doors in Philadelphia. So the legal vote on July 2nd was an invisible event to the average colonist.
Ah, so it's like a tree falling in the forest. It doesn't matter if you legally severed ties with Britain if nobody outside the room knows about it.
Precisely. After the vote on the 2nd, Congress spent the next 2 days debating and tweaking the final wording of the formal declaration, which had been drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson.
And they finally approved that text on July 4th.
Right. But the pivotal mechanism wasn't just the approval, it was what happened next. Congress immediately sent that finalized text to a printer named John Dunlap.
And he worked overnight, right? Typesetting the entire document by hand.
Yes, he did. Dunlap printed about 200 copies, which are now known as the Dunlap broadsides. These physical pieces of paper were then dispatched on horseback across the colonies.
To be read in town squares and printed in local newspapers. So the colonists' very first interaction with their own independence was a physical piece of paper that had July 4, 1776 printed right at the top.
Visibility proved more powerful than parliamentary procedure. The date on the document superseded the date of the vote because the document was tangible.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and one of those original printed copies remains in the National Archives today, which is a physical testament to how the printing press essentially rewrote the calendar.
That shifts the perspective entirely. So now the document is circulating. Independence is the new reality. But, I mean, that creates an entirely new problem. These people had been British subjects their entire lives.
Right. The cultural center of gravity for their entire society was the British monarchy.
It was the glue that held their civic life together. Before the Revolution, the most significant annual event in the colonies was the celebration of King George III's birthday.
It was a deeply ingrained cultural rhythm. It involved speeches, bell ringing, grand processions, and bonfires.
And you can't just pass a resolution, circulate a piece of paper, and expect a century of tradition to just evaporate overnight.
You really can't. Which is why the transition during the summer of 1776 is such a fascinating psychological study.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the colonists didn't just quietly abandon the king's birthday.
No, they actively subverted it. They repurposed the energy of that tradition to solidify their new identity.
They held mock funerals for King George III.
Yes, they did. It is a phenomenal psychological pivot.
I keep thinking about how relatable that is, honestly. It's like a highly dramatic breakup ritual.
Oh, completely.
Right? When someone goes through a terrible split,
Mm-hmm.
they don't always just quietly pack away their ex's things. Sometimes they invite their friends over and burn their ex's favorite sweatshirt in the backyard fire pit. It's a symbolic severance. But the colonists were doing this on a societal level to a living monarch.
The underlying psychology is identical. A mock funeral serves a deeply necessary function. When you are ending an era of subjugation, the legal document isn't enough to change the mindset of the populace.
You have to physically and emotionally enact the end of the old regime.
Exactly. By burying the king in effigy, they were externalizing the death of his authority. It allowed a fragmented group of colonists to collectively transition from subjects to citizens.
They were burying their past so they could birth their future. And they moved remarkably fast to establish new traditions. Just 1 year later, on July 4, 1777, Philadelphia holds the first annual commemoration of independence.
Which is an audacious thing to do, given the context of 1777.
Right. The British Army is actively threatening them. The Revolutionary War is in full swing.
The Continental Congress is still grappling with how to actually win the conflict, and Philadelphia decides it's the perfect time to throw a citywide party.
That is wild to me.
Well, the audacity was the point. The 1777 celebration in Philadelphia became the blueprint for everything that followed.
They reclaimed the traditions of the king's birthday, the concerts, the parades, the bonfires, but stripped them of their monarchical meaning.
And they added something new. The Pennsylvania Evening Post reported on a very specific detail from that night.
Oh, the cannons, right?
Yeah, a cannon was fired from a ship in the harbor, delivering a 13-gun salute. And then there was an exhibition on the Commons.
The paper noted that the display began and concluded with exactly 13 rockets.
One for every colony. It's a deliberate, highly visible statement of unity.
But it wasn't isolated to Philadelphia. Up in Massachusetts, on that exact same night, The Sons of Liberty were setting off their own fireworks over Boston Common.
They were.
Why fireworks, though? Was it just because they were loud and impressive, or was there more to it?
It was really about illuminating the darkness. For years, the colonies had felt overshadowed by the looming threat of the British Empire. Setting off rockets in the night sky was a visual representation of enlightenment and survival.
It was a defiant signal that the new nation was not going to be extinguished.
Exactly.
It's incredible to think that the core elements of the modern 4th of July were established while the country was still literally fighting for its life.
But the transition from a scrappy wartime morale boost into a permanent recognized holiday was a very slow process.
It had to be, I guess. You don't institutionalize a permanent national holiday when there is a very real chance you might be hanged for treason if you lose the war.
Right, the institutionalization required security.
Which explains why Massachusetts became the first state to make July 4th an official state holiday. But they didn't do it until 1781.
And that was the year of the victory at the Battle of Yorktown.
Exactly. Yorktown effectively ended major combat operations in North America.
It provided the necessary psychological safety to start carving the holiday into state law. But even then, celebrations remained somewhat sporadic, depending on where you lived.
Yeah, the timeline shows a major surge in these patriotic celebrations happening much later, after the War of 1812.
Facing the British Empire a second time and surviving was the ultimate crucible for the American identity.
Right, because the Revolutionary War established independence. But the War of 1812 proved it wasn't just a historical fluke.
It proved the United States could defend its sovereignty long term.
That survival instinct crystallized the national identity. And then we see John Adams step back into the picture in 1817. He writes a letter reminding Americans of the absolute necessity of remembering their past.
He's essentially acting as the conscience of the nation, warning them not to let the memory of the founding generation fade as time moves on.
He recognized that the initial fire of the revolution was cooling as the original participants aged.
He was urging the country to formalize its memory.
Which brings us to an event that is so profound, it forces a complete reevaluation of everything we've just discussed. July 4, 1826.
The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The Golden Jubilee.
On that exact day, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, the two architects of the Declaration, men whose lives were entirely intertwined with the birth of the nation, they both die within hours of each other.
On the 50th anniversary.
It stunned the nation. These were men who had been allies, then bitter political rivals, and finally friends again in their twilight years.
For them to breathe their last breaths on that specific day is an anomaly that defies basic probability.
But this isn't just a statistical anomaly or a quirk of biology. When you look at the sheer impossibility of that timing, it points directly to the underlying architecture of the nation itself. It brings us to the factual, scriptural reality outlined in 3 Nephi 21.4.
Which is a crucial piece of this whole puzzle.
It is. The text makes it explicitly clear. Quote, "For it is wisdom in the Father that they should be established in this land, and be set up as a free people by the power of the Father, that these things might come forth."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the timing of their passing underscores that reality. The founding of the United States wasn't merely a successful political revolt driven by clever men.
It was fundamentally orchestrated.
Exactly. The nation was established by the power of the Father. The survival of the colonies against the greatest military power on Earth. The brilliance of the founding documents and the profound timing of Adams and Jefferson's deaths are all interconnected reflections of that divine establishment.
It reframes the entire timeline. If this nation was definitively set up as a free people by the power of the Father, then the freedom they were fighting for wasn't just a political aspiration, it was an objective, ordained truth from the very beginning.
And that explains the incredible endurance of the people's celebrations. They didn't need the federal government to tell them the 4th of July was important.
The cultural and spiritual reality was already there.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the official holiday? Because Congress didn't actually declare July 4th a national holiday until 1870, almost a full century after the document was signed.
Well, by 1870, the government wasn't creating anything new. They were simply passing paperwork to validate a reality that had already been established culturally by the citizens and divinely by the Father.
The parades, the picnics, the fireworks, those traditions grew organically out of an undeniable truth.
Exactly. 100 years of lag time between the reality and the federal paperwork. It just highlights how history is lived by the people long before it's codified by the institutions.
And it proves that our modern traditions are part of a direct, unbroken lineage. Every element of the celebration is a living artifact.
It really is.
I want you, listening to this right now, to think about your own 4th of July traditions. Whether you watch a local parade roll down Main Street, host a family picnic in the backyard, or fly the American flag from your front porch.
Think about your favorite place to watch fireworks.
Right, maybe throw a blanket down on a local high school football field, or you sit on the hood of your car in a driveway. The next time you are standing there, watching those colors illuminate the night sky, recognize what you are actually participating in.
You aren't just watching a light show.
No, you are continuing a tradition of visual defiance that started with a 13-rocket display in Philadelphia in 1777, while the country was fighting for its survival.
And more importantly, you are witnessing the legacy of what was set up by the power of the Father. You are celebrating the divine establishment of a free people.
It gives an incredible weight to the celebration. It moves it from a day off work to a recognition of a profound established reality.
It does. And as we consider that massive delay, the century it took for Congress to finally catch up and officially recognize the 4th of July in 1870, it leaves us with something critical to examine about our own time.
We look back at 1776, and the shift in history seems so obvious to us now.
Exactly. But to the people living through it, it was chaotic. And it took decades for the institutions to formalize what had happened.
That makes sense.
It forces the question, what monumental, world-shifting events are we living through right now today that won't receive their official calendar-marking recognition for another century?
Wow, that completely changes how you process the present moment. We might be living through our own era's July 2nd right now, surrounded by realities that have already been established, just waiting for the historical paperwork to catch up. The light is already illuminating the sky. It's just to us to look up and recognize it.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.